All right. Hello, everyone. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you may be. Welcome, and thank you for joining our webinar. My name is Matt Tague. I lead GEM's Customer Talent Advisory team, and it is my pleasure today to moderate today's webinar. I'll be joined by two amazing folks, Ankur Kapadia, who is Head of Talent Acquisition Technology at Wayfair, along with Janet Mertens, who is Vice President of Research at the Josh Bersin Company. We'll be discussing a little bit about how Wayfair and other companies are approaching talent operations in this climate and how teams generally are leveraging the economic downturn to mature and optimize their recruiting processes. Before I hand the mic over to our speakers, I want to quickly go over a few housekeeping items with everyone. So first point is obviously today's webinar is going to be recorded. We'll also make it available on demand after this live session as well, if you want to share it out. We've also added some additional resources, which are available through the related content section of your webinar console. So please check those out as they become available there. If you have questions on this platform, feel free to send them through the Ask a Question section of the webinar console. We'll definitely have time for questions, so we highly encourage folks, as you're listening to the insights from the two great speakers we have here today through the fireside, please send in those questions and we'll be reviewing those throughout, and we'll have time afterwards to review those. And then finally, really just, want to ask and kick things off with everyone, go ahead and drop in the chat two things. One, where you're joining from today, and then also what you're most excited to hear about from our two speakers in the session that we have. So go ahead and drop that in there. Wow, I'm seeing Casino, California, amazing. Mexico, fantastic. We're international already. Who else do we have here? Let's have a few more folks drop that in the chat. Where are you from? What are you interested to learn today? Excellent. We've got nationwide coverage. You got Reno, DC, Nashville. Fantastic. Bay Area, love it. India, amazing. I'm not sure what time it is there, but thank you for joining us, and I'm sure at an uncomfortable time, so much appreciated there. Berlin, fantastic. All right, excellent. So let's go ahead and jump in here. With that, let's go ahead and meet our speakers. So as I mentioned, I'm Matt Tague. I lead our talent advisory team here at GEM. We are a strategic team that works with our customers to help advise them think about their talent strategies with the GEM platform. Wayfair is one of the teams that I've had the pleasure of working with. And so with that, I'd like to first welcome Ankur, who Head of Talent Acquisition Technology at Wayfair, to the stage. So Ankur, over to you.
Hey everyone, like Matt said, I'm Ankur. I lead the Talent Acquisition Tech team at Wayfair. Really excited to be here.
Awesome, welcome Ankur. We've also got Janet Mertens, who leads Vice President of Research at the Josh Bersin Company. So Janet, I'll go ahead and kick it over to you. We'll go through your slides, and then we'll be opening it up to a fireside chat, followed by a live Q&A. We really want to hear from you and get those questions in there. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Janet. Over to you.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Ankur. Hello, everyone. Janet Mertens. As Matt mentioned, I am the Vice President of Research here at the Josh Bersin Company. For those of you who, many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with Josh Bersin, the brand, the person. Josh and our team really focus on kind of uncovering the latest trends and, strategies that are making an impact across all domains of HR. In my role, I lead our research in a couple of different areas. I focus on talent acquisition, of course, and I'm going to be talking to you about our latest thinking and study around this topic. I also look at our at trends in health and well-being and HR transformation and a number of other topics as well. So delighted to be here. Thank you to everyone for joining us. Maybe what I'll do, Matt and Ankur, is just take sort of 10, 15 minutes to talk a little bit about the research that we just conducted. It's about a year's worth of ongoing study into the forces impacting talent acquisition and hiring and the strategies that we are exploring that companies are using to great effect to thrive in this environment. So if we can go to the next slide, I'll share a little bit about the kind of the context of this research. So we started out on this journey of trying to understand what's happening in talent acquisition, probably a couple of years ago. I mean, Josh and the team, all of us have been studying this for many, many years, but really dug into sort of mid-pandemic, what is happening with hiring. It's been a very volatile time, of course. And what we really wanted to do, kind of two things that we set out to do with this research. So one was we wanted to really understand what strategies, what people practices and business practices are companies deploying, successfully or maybe not so successfully to hire the right people, to hire and retain talent for the organization. So that was sort of the first step. And I'll talk a little bit about the eye chart there on the left-hand side of the screen in a moment. The second half of the study is really about what's making a difference, right? So it's, what are the practices that actually have an impact, not just on finding the right people, bringing them into the organization and engaging them, but how does talent acquisition really impact the financial performance and the innovation and the sort of market leadership of the company itself? So it's a really validating piece of research. So let me just take a peek, sort of into or under the hood of the practices that we did look at. So we looked at about 100 or so people practices, traditional and sort of emerging talent acquisition practices across about 6-7 domains, really. And you can see the domains or the dimensions that we cover on the left-hand side, kind of across the top. And we looked at results from about 600 companies. We analyzed the data set at around 400. We wanted to focus on companies that were sort of 500 employees or more. And this research really is cross-industry. It's global. We looked at organizations, across the world and in multiple, I think probably 15 to 18 industries that were covered. And, what we really wanted to understand is, look, there's a lot happening in talent acquisition. There's all of that traditional operations of TA, of recruiting. So we looked at, the governance and the operating model of talent acquisition. What are companies doing around TA leadership, around integrating TA with the business? We know, and we've talked to many, many heads of TA, CHROs, HR executives who talk about the, sort of the importance that TA now plays in the organization. And so we wanted to really get a sense of how are companies shifting from, historical models of talent acquisition to really becoming talent advisors. What kind of ecosystem of partners do organizations have? So that was really around the governance and the operations. We, of course, had to measure practices around the recruiting lifecycle itself. So everything from sourcing and, CRM, kind of attracting candidates, through to assessments. We looked at the personalized, virtual interview process, selection techniques, and onboarding itself, especially in this new sort of remote and virtual first landscape, or in this new sort of era of virtual hiring. And we can't talk about hiring and talent acquisition without thinking about experience. So we did a whole, we really wanted to understand and measure what are companies doing around candidate experience, of course, which is crucial, but not just candidate experience. So we also measured, what does the recruiter experience look like now? What does the hiring manager experience look like? What about new hires and remote hires? And then sort of shifting across the map in front of you, we also looked at brand. Nearly every company, and I had the privilege of talking to dozens of heads of TA as we kicked off this research and continued to study this topic. Nearly every company I talk to tells me we are refreshing our brand. We've just done a big brand refresh through the pandemic, and afterwards that's been accelerated in a lot of cases. So for us, we really, wanted to get a good bead on what's making a difference in the brand refresh, in the employee value proposition. We know that the EVP has changed, through the last few years. So what are companies, how are they going about refreshing their brand and thinking about their brand, their employer brand strategy and their EVP, and how are they shifting that? And then, for a number of companies, internal mobility has become a critical part of having a sustainable talent, workforce. And so we wanted to measure what are the processes, cultural barriers, technologies that companies are using to actually tap into their internal talent. And how are they putting that talent, how are they deploying that talent in parts of the organization? How are they creating jobs with skill development opportunities and variety of skills? How are they collaborating on job design for candidates? And then, of course, underneath it all, you'll see the technology that plays a major part in talent acquisition, and the TA tech stack and HR capabilities around TA are really important as well. So that's the kind of the lay of the land. As I say, there were about 100 practices that we dug into, and on the right-hand side, you'll see the kind of the outputs that we wanted to measure the practices against. And so if you go to the next slide, and I know there's a lot on here, so I'm going to just pick a few things out to talk about, and then we're going to hear lots more about some of these core themes that emerged. What we found in our research is, out of the 100 or so practices, there are some that are absolutely having an outsized impact on the business itself. So not just on, talent pipelines or retention and engagement or reputation as a great place to work, but at the end of the day, hiring great talent is impacting the entire business. And so what this slide really shows are what we call the 15 essential practices for talent acquisition. And I just want to pick on a couple of things here, a couple of themes that rose to the top, and then we're gonna talk, together about how some of these are playing out. So the first thing I'll mention is you'll see lots of orange on the right. Out of the 15 most impactful practices to the organization, half of them were around brand. And so, what's really, as we kind of dug into this and looked at the data, what's really interesting about the brand story is we are really recognizing, and I think companies that are leading and doing well are recognizing that the employer brand is your corporate brand. I mean, gone are the days of just having a really slick employee, careers site, and it doesn't matter what's happening over here in the corporate brand. This is really about a thoughtful, meaningful, authentic, and consistent employer brand that matches and aligns with the company and corporate brand as well. And so the word trust came through very clearly in a lot of the, the results of our research around how companies are showing up for their employees and their candidates. So that brand story is really, really important. A couple of other things I want to share here. When we think about experience, and this is maybe, as a research leader, I am always looking for that kind of that surprising and most interesting, fascinating nugget. And for me, the story around recruiter development shone through in this. And you can see it came up as one of the most impactful practices across the outcomes that we looked at, is this notion of continuously developing the recruiting team. And we know in TA that it's been another year of uncertainty, and we, as we head into 2023 optimistically, and we're going to talk a little bit about that, the companies that have been most successful tell us stories about how they are thinking about recruiters differently. So this development of, sort of new skills for recruiters came through quite strongly. And then one other thing I want to talk about, and it's the internal mobility story, and we're going to dig into this again with Ankur and Matt, but internal mobility is something that for a lot of companies, they are just switching on to. So a lot of organizations told us, I think it was something like 80% of companies said, yes, we absolutely want to tap into our talent and we post all our jobs internally first. But when it came to really mature practices around internal mobility, moving people around, thinking about skills adjacencies, what are the non-linear career moves or career pathways that companies can provide for employees? How do you skill employees and make visible the skills that your employees have and then deploy them? Most companies, maybe 75%, told us, we're just not there yet. And so as we head into 2023, I think that mobility story, especially as employees and candidates, vocally say, hey, we want career opportunities, we want development. This becomes a kind of a huge part of the retention strategy for organizations. So let's go to the next slide. I'm going to talk a little bit about what this all means and how companies sort of show up in terms of talent acquisition practices. So I'll just take a couple of moments here, and then I think we've got a poll for everyone. So when we looked at those essential practices and kind of looked at the data set that we had of the 500 or so companies, we wanted to understand, okay, so if the most essential practices are most tied or directly tied to and highly correlated with outcomes, financial outcomes, innovation outcomes, and people outcomes, where do companies fall in this sort of maturity model? And what emerged was a 4-level maturity model that shows the different stages of talent acquisition maturity. So I'm going to just start at level 1 and quickly just describe these, because I want you to be thinking about your own organizations as I talk through these. So at level 1, about 15% or so of organizations still operate at this level, and that's regardless of size. It's not just the smallest companies that, as we found. This is a very, what we call reactive operating model for TA, and it's very fragmented. Typically, this is these are organizations that where recruiting is very much a downstream process. They are order takers. It's very transactional. It's often, they often use the post and pray method to hire candidates. And there's very little focus at this level on experience, candidate experience for sure, and recruiters and hiring managers as well. It's also there's very limited integration with the business. Now, what happens at level 2, which is a big step forward, and a good chunk of companies fall into this level, is there's an application of standardization, right? So it's very much about process and structure. This is where we see COEs develop. There's governance that's applied. And really it becomes talent acquisition takes on a global role in the organization. And then in level 3, companies sort of, they maybe have realized that the pendulum has swung quite far on the structure and the process. And then in level 3, there's a kind of a reset a little bit on the individuals themselves, the humans in the process. So there's a real focus in level 3 around candidate experience, personalization. A little bit more attention is given to the recruiters themselves. This is where the TA tech stack starts to get really quite complex as point solutions are added. And there's a fair bit of as you would imagine, a fair bit of investment in level 3 on brand, employer brand, and EVP, because these companies are thinking about candidate experience. And then we get to level 4. And level 4 are our North Star trailblazer organizations. We call this creative and human-centered. And I would say the characteristics of the organizations, and there's only about a quarter of them that are operating at this level, are a boldness to experiment. They are really thinking about talent acquisition not as a single function in the business that simply hires talent in, but talent acquisition takes on a strategic a strategic lens in level 4. This is where hiring is seen as a competitive advantage. These are companies that have a deep integration between talent acquisition and the business. And there's a really, there's a creative application of technology. So this is where companies really start to be quite deliberate in how they're using automation or artificial intelligence, really tapping into data to make decisions in their hiring. So let me pause there. And I think we've got a poll for everyone to see, where do you think you fit on that maturity model in your organization today? And you may be thinking about parts of your TA or your workforce and how TA might be different for different segments of your organization, and that's okay. But let's see what folks, and I don't know where we look for the results. So let's see, we'll give everyone a chance to answer. And then Matt, where do we see these results?
They should populate live here shortly. We'll give folks a little bit to answer here.
So level 1, reactive and fragmented. Level 2 is all about process and structure. Level 3 gets into personalization. And level 4, TA really becomes human-centered. It's really focused on putting the people first, whether that's the recruiters, the candidates, the leadership. Fantastic. All right, so look at that. It's a very reflective distribution, very similar to what we saw in our research, which is great. Lots of folks at level 2 and into level 3. We've still got our companies who are operating at level 1 and looking to kind of make that shift. And then we've got, the elite group of level 4 who have sort of matured along that path. This is fantastic. Matt, Ankur, I'm going to just take one more minute and I'll go to the next slide if we can. And
actually, I think, Janet, let's take that as a moment to segue. It's a perfect segue to hearing from a level 4 company, I believe, Wayfair and Ankur. So let's go ahead and jump to that as a fireside, if we may, here. But thank you for that awesome research. Hope that's as useful to others as I found that as well. So, Ankur, I just wanted to kick it off. You're a Wayfair, global retailer. You experience a large volume of hiring throughout the year. Janet talked a lot about the importance of, EVP and talent brand, employer brand right now. How have you kind of iterated Wayfair's approach to talent brand over these last, 6 months or so in this environment? Love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, thanks for the question. And thank you for the compliment that we're a level 4 company. I don't know if I had to give us those accolades yet, but that's definitely our aspiration. I would say, Wayfair just refreshed our employee value proposition. We think it's essential to understand how our employees and our candidates experience Wayfair and reflect that externally in an authentic way. I'll start by saying that it's very much an investment. I don't know how many of the people on this call have done this already, but you need the time, you need the resources, you need the internal commitment to make that happen. It takes interviewing employees at all levels and all different job profiles, just to make sure that it resonates internally and externally. Many people make the mistake of thinking refreshing an EVP is updating the career site or email communications you might send. This is, in fact, I would say the last step, and often the most tactical. The art here is actually knowing who to talk to, synthesizing that information, presenting some options, and then selecting what resonates most with the most people. We landed on that at Wayfair, we're the home of possibilities. This actually resonates with our, I would say, bifurcated workforce. We have a large frontline workforce and then a corporate workforce. It spoke to all possible career paths that people could take here, and really harkens back to our belief in internal mobility. Wayfair's hiring ethos is that we hire really smart people and throw them at really challenging problems, and that's where the magic happens. So designing recruiting systems and processes around that can actually be very tough, but we make it happen every day. So technology can be a great lever on how to amplify your employer brand. That can be done through like the career site, email communications, branded recruiting materials. But yeah, it's definitely an investment.
Love that. And just two quick follow-on questions there. And then Janet, I'd love to get your thoughts on this as well. But one thing I'd love to know, was that a marketing-led process? Was that a TA-led process? Like who drove that within Wayfair to get that refreshed talent brand and EVP there?
So I think, sorry, you broke up a little bit. You're asking who drove that effort?
Correct. Marketing or TA or both?
It was, well, we actually have an employer brand function within TA, so we're fortunate to have that. They worked very much in conjunction with our marketing team to do it, but we did have a dedicated employer brand function to make that happen. And like I said, it required commitment at every level. We were in sync with kind of the consumer brand. I think fortunately we have a strong consumer brand, so we were able to play off of that. But obviously the employee value proposition is different, it's distinct. Why would you want to work here instead of just shop here? And fortunately, we were able to play off of that. So I think if you have that, I think there's definitely some synchrony you can make happen.
Awesome. And I'm curious, how has that refresh helped you in this environment? We all know this is a challenging hiring environment for many different reasons. The demand picture is murky that Janet mentioned, earlier for many of us. How has that helped you during this time?
Yeah, I think the biggest part is that it kept it open. I think the home of possibilities, which again is our EVP, I think there's a lot of possibilities here. Like I think in lots of change, there's opportunity. Wayfair, again, from an internal mobility perspective and career opportunity perspective, there's a lot of opportunity here. Like like I said, we hire really smart people, throw them at really challenging problems. If you take a look at our job descriptions even, you won't notice a lot of, you need to have X years of experience in this specific discipline to be considered for this role. It's actually quite important to us to actually cast a wide net, and we'll look at a holistic candidate to understand what they might bring to the table before considering them for a job. So that's why I think maybe that has helped us in this environment.
Awesome. Love that. And then Janet, I'm curious, you talk to so many TA leaders, in your work, are others focusing on this, to the extent Wayfair is, and what are they looking to drive with EVP and talent brand in this environment? Like what goals are they looking to achieve? Like why focus on that?
Well, and I love the story, Ankur, from Wayfair, and I think that consumer brand feeds our employer brand is really important. I think a lot of organizations are seeing that. I've spoken to, airlines who have said every candidate is potentially a consumer, right? Is potentially one of our customers. So that consistency of messaging has been really important. And then Ankur, you commented on something that I wanted to talk a little bit about, and it's the trend of hiring for potential, right? So as we think about broadening our workforce, tapping untraditional, non-traditional talent, increasing diversity across the workforce, hiring for potential is such an important part of that story. And I think what we're seeing a lot of companies start to realize is removing the barriers of whether it's college degrees or resumes, in fact, for early grad hires, and thinking about the skills and the experiences that are not necessarily in the rearview mirror of candidates, but what is their potential? What are those durable skills, behavioral skills, power skills, we call them at Bersin, that candidates can bring and potentially be placed into roles that they weren't even expecting. And I love that.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's fantastic, Janet. Yeah, I think, already got some great questions from Amanda and Santiago in the chat. Thank you for sharing those. We'll address those a little bit later, but definitely checking those out there. I think, from my perspective, I would just add, for folks looking to get started in EVP that have fewer resources, like don't let perfect be the enemy of the good, right? Like start with what you have, start with where you are, and build on that there. So this is a key takeaway, I think, that we're hearing from our presenters is, if you're not thinking about your talent brand or EVP now, like now is especially the time to be doing that as a TA leader in the function there. So great commentary on that from both of you. Thank you. Let's shift a little bit now to the other part of that, the other focus area that Janet, you highlighted, which is around internal mobility. And I know, Ankur, you and I have worked a little bit together on various, projects between Wayfair and GEM, and I know a little bit about your culture there, but it's quite unique what you guys are doing. And I'd love to hear what that looks like at Wayfair for you, the internal mobility piece.
Sorry, can you repeat that one more time, Matt?
Yeah, tell me a little bit about the internal mobility at Wayfair.
Yeah, so internal mobility is actually very much within Wayfair's DNA. I feel like a lot of companies say that, but we actually have what we call a career jungle gym at Wayfair. Internal mobility is very much encouraged and celebrated. I think it's actually one of our key differentiators as an employer. It happens at every level, by the way, from the most junior employees all the way up to our most senior executives. And I actually think promoting that internal mobility, even at that senior level, like helps model the way for everyone else to kind of understand that that's a key way for you to grow your career here. We think about technology a little different in terms of internal mobility as well. We're in the fortunate position to have a dedicated team of like talent engineers on the talent tech team that works alongside our recruiting operations team that kind of helps us think about like what differentiating technology could we have here, because this experience really matters for us. So we've actually built our own internal mobility platform in addition to that sits on top of our ATS. So it really speaks to the commitment that Wayfair has to internal mobility, that we made that investment. We've done a lot of, in addition, if you don't have the tech talent to do that or priority, I would say there's just process things you could do. How easy is it for an internal candidate to understand what opportunities are available? What kind of culture do you have that allows for internal mobility? Do you have a culture where managers are kind of hoarding talent, or is it that they're talking to them regularly in their career dev conversations? Like, okay, like let's talk about how long you're going to be in this role, and maybe let's talk about your next role at Wayfair. Are your employees encouraged to kind of think about your company first when they're thinking about making a job change? How easy is it for them to understand what other opportunities they might have available for them at your organization? These are conversations we regularly have. And again, even from a process perspective, like, are your recruiters incentivized to look at internal candidates first before considering external candidates? There's all this institutional knowledge. I think I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but there's all this institutional knowledge that comes with employees moving from one part of the business to the other. Again, is that a celebrated thing, or are hiring managers still thinking like, well, let's just kind of see what's out there first? There's a lot culturally that matters in the internal mobility equation. Like, of course, tech is a part of it, but I think the culture is the first part.
Love that. And I love the highlight about the processes there, because I think not every company has the resources to build an amazing internal mobility tool. If they can, that's awesome. And well done to you all for having done that. But the processes are things we can influence. And I think within TA orgs, so often a lot of TA orgs think of ourselves as only externally focused, right? Like we bring in the external talent to the company, whereas in reality, we should be the stewards of talent for the entire company. And I think thinking of it as one talent pool versus an internal and external, and treating it as such can yield a lot of great results that forward-thinking companies are seeing now. And with that, Janet, we had a chance to talk about some stories about mobility within the recruiting teams that you uncovered with some of your conversations. I think this will be top of mind for many on the call today. I'd love to hear what you heard from some companies you spoke with.
Yeah, I mean, internal mobility is such an important part. And Matt, Ankur, to your point, to echo what you said, I think for our North Star companies, for our level fours like Wayfair and others that we've talked to, the mindset shift of going from external talent, this is what TA does, internal talent, managers will handle that, or someone else handles that. That is where I think our level four companies stand apart from their peers. This is really, to your point, Matt, about thinking about talent holistically, whether it's internal employees, gig employees, alumni, right? What is your pool of talent across all of those domains? And so we heard great stories about internal mobility, companies who have, considered the deli counter approach to internal mobility to increase equity. And what I mean by that is, we talked to a company who has established a deli counter approach where employees in the program get a number, like when you're at a deli counter, and it removes any worries about not getting to the front of the line, not getting the opportunities. Every employee has the opportunity to have the conversation about what are my options, what development can I take, what are the paths forward. They have career coaches that might be separate from their functional or people managers. And then we started hearing stories about recruiters themselves. And I think, Matt, to your point, and it's such a good segue for us to talk about recruiter development. During the pandemic, there were so many instances across industries of recruiting teams just being shut down, right, and furloughed or drastically reduced. And so for some companies, a few whether it was airlines or financial services, we've heard stories about recruiters being redeployed into the business, right? Making relationships, building business acumen, building skills and expertise about the business that they serve, that when they came back into TA when the time was right, they're coming back with these incredible stories and incredible connections and just a much better understanding of the business that they serve, the market they serve, and being able to find talent in different ways and to work with the business in much more strategic ways. So I think it's been a real silver lining.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that story. I mean, we've all seen the news of different teams and how different recruiting teams are impacted today. And I may be slightly biased, but I love recruiters and I love TA folks. And that idea, like we have so much to offer beyond recruiting as well, different skill sets that are so synergistic with other parts of businesses we support. So I love that companies are taking that holistic approach and shifting people to, customer service roles or sales roles, or, almost like to your point, helping them learn more about the business while hiring may be slower for the company, not losing that talent that they've developed there. So that is a phenomenal story. That warms my heart to hear that. That's great. Let's jump a little bit to the skills piece there. So Janet, you talked a lot about, internal mobility and skills development there. I'd love to hear a little bit about, how you go about defining some of those skills. I think a lot of companies get wrapped around the axle with the precise definition of skills. Would love to hear, Janet, your thoughts on that. And then Ankur, your experience within Wayfair of like mapping and applying skills there.
Yeah, well, and I definitely want Ankur to share your story because I know it's a fantastic one. I mean, I do think you're right, Matt. So many companies approach the skills question with, we're going to spend the time and map out all of our skills. We're gonna introduce a skills taxonomy, and it's going to solve all the problems. And the reality is that often is an effort. It's a huge effort to do well, and it can be outdated almost immediately. One of the things that we talk about a lot with companies, especially at level 4, that differentiates them, I think, is an understanding of skills and capabilities, right? And capabilities are skills and expertise and experience together. And we talk about durable, power skills or durable skills like the behavioral skills of consultative thinking and flexibility and creativity and curiosity. And so for a lot of our level 4 companies, there's a real focus on understanding, where in the organization those skills or those capabilities really live, and really turning up the visibility on them so that as opportunities for mobility, for career paths, for gig work, for projects come up, they're not as focused on tracking and making sure the skills themselves are exactly correct. It's more about those opportunities for conversations, for relationships, to allow employees to move into those roles.
Love that. And what are your thoughts, Ankur?
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think skills mapping is important, but honestly, I haven't seen any company really do this well, including us. We tried, right? I think a lot of companies approach this, just like Janet said, is like a very transactional exercise. Like, let's ask all the employees to tag their skills, and then let's go through an exercise where we take all our jobs and tag skills to those jobs. But it's a point-in-time exercise. It'll become quickly outdated. How valuable is it over the long term? I think there's questions there. Like, maybe it could be, but I really actually think it goes back to the culture of like, what kind of culture do you have? Are you encouraging people to move internally? Do you have an avenue for them to actually learn new skills if you're saying that they need to have skills? I think one of the more important things, and again, this is like core to Wayfair's culture, we believe a lot in on-the-job learning. Like I said, we hire really smart people, put them against really challenging problems, and they learn on the job. And that's actually something that's really valued here. So does your culture allow that? I think is an important question. Also, to the point made earlier, I think, are there flex assignments available? Are there secondments available? Is there like a way for a special assignment to be had? I think a lot of companies get really tripped up in kind of the, and again, preaching to the choir probably on this call about the talent systems, updates required to make that happen, or like performance strategy things, like how are we going to evaluate people if they're kind of like in a split role. But at the end of the day, we can figure all that out, right? Like, let's not let that administrative element be the barrier to helping people flex into new positions. I would really encourage everyone to think about it that way.
Yeah,
and
love
Ankur,
that.
can I just chime in on that for a
Please.
second? I love your comment about the learning on the job, and I think the skills conversation really has shifted to how do you build skills and then use the technology to track those, right? So there are companies that are using AI and automation to make it much easier for employees who might be on a project, a cross-functional assignment, a gig assignment, a stretch assignment, to actually be, naturally and automatically updating their skills profile so that it's not, it doesn't become such a tedious role. It's actually part of, the focus is actually on skill development and skill building.
Awesome. Love that. Yeah. And I think, just to echo both points, like this is the time for us as TA leaders to be that trusted advisor and really get our business stakeholders to think differently about the talent that we have internally, right? So to your point, Ankur, don't let, not having a fancy system or having it perfectly figured out stop you from, getting your hiring managers to think differently beyond just a precise set of requirements for a job to the potential to be able to do that job. And often that is found internally there. So love that experience there. We've got some great questions from the audience, so we're going to jump in. Audience, if you've got more questions, please pop them in the chat here. We'll review all of these here. So I'm going to kind of group these and may not go in order, but I'll start with the first one, Ankur. So Amanda, her question is really around, Wayfair had a layoff earlier this year, like many companies did and are doing, today, as we see in the news. I think I'm going to shift this a little bit, Amanda, but I'd love to know, how did you get buy-in internally to focus on, employer brand and mobility and like shift the focus of TA? Like, what did that process look like?
Yeah, to be honest, the employer brand efforts were long underway by the time we, all this turmoil changed. I mean, I don't know if anyone else felt like it, but it felt like kind of a record scratch in the air for the whole industry. I feel like everyone was hiring like crazy earlier in the year, and then all of a sudden, things changed very quickly for many companies. So I would say we were very thoughtful about it, right? Like we had all these plans to actually make a bigger splash in our employer brand, but we were thoughtful about it. Like, what would resonate most? And again, going back to the original points I made, like, it's really important for an employer brand to be authentic. You can't, I think a lot of companies, I would say, kind of screw this up where it actually ends up feeling more salesy than it probably should be. It's really not. There is, of course, a marketing element to it. We want people to apply to our jobs, but it really.
I think Ankur may have frozen.
And I feel like a lot of companies are in this position where they're probably evolving as a result of what's going on. I think a lot of companies have had to adapt to these pandemic conditions, and then now this new kind of like, as we're emerging hopefully from the pandemic conditions. And I think it's important for your employer brand to kind of evolve with that. I think it has to be somewhat dynamic. Like, so much goes into developing these things, but I think having the employer brand be authentic is probably a first principle. So you don't want to kind of so disaggregate like what your employer marketing efforts are from what's going on in the company and the economy. So I think you have to be really thoughtful about that. So whatever you can do to make it authentic, that's what I would lean on. Does that answer the question?
I believe so. Yes. Thank you for that. Janet, anything to add to that? Or?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's exactly what we saw in the research as well, Ankur, is authenticity in the brand. It's not just simply, a slick career site when, when your company is perhaps headed in another direction at a corporate level. I think that, we've heard stories of companies who have really shifted away. Employees, candidates, they're seeing everything now, right? There is no hiding from the good, the bad, and the ugly, whether it's on external sites, Glassdoor, et cetera, or just, through networks and social media. So I think it's very easy. Candidates are very, very well equipped to recognize where you are being authentic. And I think for companies who are really unafraid to show, warts and all, what the reality of working in the organization is like, that's proving to be quite successful. Getting rid of stock images and having, individual employees in your recruitment marketing efforts, tapping into, IBM has a great story. They shared that they realize their 500, 400,000 person workforce, everyone has the ability to take videos and pictures with their phones. So they sent out an invitation to all IBMers to share who they are, and that's now what populates their their career site is real, authentic, sometimes gritty imagery and marketing kind of content of actual people.
Yeah. Excellent. Yeah, I would echo both points, and I would just add too. I think for us as TA leaders, it's time for a rethink of what we look at as our core metrics as well. Right. So specifically in this environment where hiring is, maybe slower than it has been previously, we're so used to measuring ourselves in hires. Right. But when you're focusing on things like internal mobility or employer brand, like those are different metrics. And I think a lot of teams have not built the muscle to talk about the value of those metrics, like number of people engaged or number of people converted, or some of those more top of funnel metrics that companies may not be used to focusing on as much there. So I think a lot of teams that I work with, I encourage them to think about that and also proactively share it with their stakeholders. Like if we're not engaging people with the talent brand right now, when things do pick up, that'll be a very sharp turn and very hard to navigate if you're not investing in your talent brand right now. So none of us want that. So now is the time to double down on that, I believe, as well. Excellent. We've got a couple of questions here as well about kind of skills-based hiring and hiring for potential, right? So a couple of questions I see here. How do you evaluate the potential? How do you get buy-in internally for the concept of hiring people based on skills and potential versus the precise requirements for the job? So Ankur, would love to hear any advice you have on that.
Sorry, was that directed at me first or second? Can you repeat it?
That's right. Yeah. How do you get buy-in for hiring people on potential and skills versus precise requirements?
Yeah, so it's interesting. Again, going back to the way that Wayfair thinks about hiring, like we have a structured hiring process. Every one of our jobs will have the same. We have like I'm sure many companies have this, like a bank of interview questions, like that we pick from. And then we actually lean on our what we call people principles, and we have specific questions that we'll ask to assess like where do we think this person will deliver on these competencies. There's of course in many jobs there's specific, and I'm talking specifically about corporate roles. We have different processes for some of our frontline roles, but I think it's important to think about like what is the behavioral interviewing, right? What have you done before that suggests that you'll succeed in this type of role? And I do think that structured interviewing and the debriefs that we have and kind of like the thoughtful conversations about, where do we think this person will succeed and where do we think they might have opportunities? We also offer that feedback as part of our the onboarding process. Like in the interview, this came up that this might be some area you might succeed, and this might be an area that we're thinking about that might be a development opportunity for you. Like, what do you think? So we're telling the candidates right away, kind of like, this is something we observed. What do you think this is something you'd want to invest in? Because we think this is actually, this might be something you should think about. Of course, the skills that we've identified as their strengths obviously qualified for them for the particular job, again, in some of our corporate roles. But I think that level of feedback, I think has actually helped a lot of people understand where their skills, like opportunities might be, so they can immediately start going on that journey, which I think has been actually quite helpful for us. And we do have a really great high hiring bar. I think one of my favorite parts about working at Wayfair is just like the incredible caliber of people that we have. And I think that is a direct result of the way we do this.
Excellent. Love that. I think one thing I've seen work really well too is, like we said earlier, it's very easy to get wound up in the precise definition of skills. But even if you up level at one level and look at like job families of like, what are similar job families that like generally have the same types of roles or like have some transferable skills at a high level, that can often help to unblock people's thinking to say, oh, if you're in this role in recruiting, you might be able to do sales, and vice versa, right? Or if you're in customer success, you might be able to do a similar role within the company there, and just mapping it out at a job family level can work as well. Janet, anything to add there?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, Matt. That's where the technology really comes into play, right? And we've got the internal talent market is exploding, and there's a reason for it. And I think companies at level 4, and I can share some stories if we have time, but they're really using these marketplace tools and technologies that think about adjacent skills, right? And use that data and that intelligence inside the organization to help carve out what are those opportunities for someone in marketing to head into sales, or someone in research to head into marketing, whatever those might be. I think the other piece, and Kathy, I think, asked about how do you balance against filling a void, and Ankur, you mentioned something that has come up with some of our other level 4 organizations, and that is this balance between the skills required for the job, and certainly with technical jobs, with frontline, in regulated industries, there certainly are technical skills that are must-haves. But for a number of companies, what they're also doing is balancing that with the kind of the 5 core behavioral skills that are priorities for the organization. In some cases, it might be innovation or entrepreneurship or creativity or curiosity. And, I remember talking to L'Oreal at length, and their head of TA said every single role that they hire for, which is, everything from frontline in facilities right through to their executives, their folks in the lab, their clinical folks, are asked those questions around those 5, I think for them it was 5 or 6 kind of core behavioral traits that then help build pathways for those employees.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is confidence that people can learn also on the job, right? I think a lot of companies may unfortunately be in the positions like, if you don't have this and of course some jobs are very specialized, but I would say by and large those are probably an edge case. Like many jobs can be learned. So I think having that confidence that we can actually, if you have this core set of skills and behaviors that we've sussed out in the interview process, then we can teach you on the job.
Yeah. Love it. Excellent. We've got time for one more question, so I'm going to combine 2 here into one kind of main sentiment. But if you don't have the resources, if you're not Wayfair, you're not L'Oreal, you're not some of these larger companies that we're talking about, what's one tactical thing, either EVP or internal mobility, what can or should you be doing today? What's one thing for both of you? Go.
Yeah, I would say invest in the internal mobility. I think understanding where your workforce is at, creating a culture of like, hey, like we already have talent in the house, so to speak. Like, let's talk to them about what they want to do, what their career aspirations are, then looking at our current roles and maybe future roles in the near term, where can we possibly make a match? Again, like, I don't think it needs to be some sophisticated, of course, I know there are systems out there that do this, but like, if you're really strapped for costs or resources, whatever, like, there's exercises you can do to have those conversations with people and match them to positions and kind of have that like culture of like, yeah, you can learn this because you've already been successful in this role in this company. So much of working, I think today, is like understanding the culture of the company that you're at. You're going to decrease the ramp time for that person in the new role by a significant amount if you hire them internally. So I would say investing in internal mobility is, if that was like one thing you could do, I think that's a big one.
Got it. Excellent. Janet, how about you?
Listen, Ankur took the words right out of my mouth, so I'm going to have to come up with something else here. But I do think, I just to chime in there, internal mobility and just tapping all sources of talent, internal, external, boomerang or alumni talent. There's a real need to do that for any size company now, understanding who you have in your organization and who, getting the right talent at the right time in the right place. It's not an easy thing to do. I would say the other, just to sort of add a second lens, I do think that there's a fair bit that even smaller companies can be thinking about in terms of the brand and their, the EVP, and really understanding. And Ankur, you shared some great stories. It's a journey. There's no destination to EVP. It is constantly shifting, constantly in flux. I mean, I'm constantly reading reports and research around what employees and candidates are thinking and wanting and asking for, whether it's pay or perks or flexible work or remote work or back to the office or well-being and mental health support. It is constantly changing. And I think, for smaller companies, tapping into your existing employees to understand what is important to them and checking in with your candidates and measuring candidate sentiment to know how do you need to be constantly refining and course correcting and adjusting that EVP to ensure that you are providing a meaningful relationship with your candidates and with your employees.
Awesome. That's fantastic. And I think just to make it really tactical for our audience, so many TA orgs are struggling with this existential crisis of like, what do we do? What is our value in an environment where hiring is slower? Like, this is where we can add value. This is precisely the conversation of expanding the aperture of talent internally and being the stewards of that talent and navigating and driving that process. Like, that's what we can do right now. That is one tactical thing that if you're not doing, highly consider looking at that for sure. So we're almost up on time. I want to leave with some optimism here. We've got so much doom and gloom in the news, and it's been a rough time for everyone, but let's end it with some optimism. So Ankur, what are you most optimistic about right now for the TA industry? What's one thing?
Sorry, again, was that at me? You broke up. What was the question?
Yep. What are you optimistic about now for TA? Let's come back to Ankur. Janet, maybe I think his screen froze there, but Janet, how about you? What are you most optimistic about right now for TA for next year?
I think this notion that 2023 is an opportunity for kind of that bold experimentation for TA, whether it's redeploying recruiters into other parts of the business or applying technology in new ways to automate the recruiter's time. I mean, in some industries, hiring is still up and recruiters are still overloaded. So really being creative and kind of breaking free of the traditional tried and true practices and following suit and being aspirational. I think that's what 2023 is going to hold for TA.
Ankur, anything else to add to that?
Yeah, I would say I'm most excited about positive trends in pay equity and salary transparency, honestly. I think for those who have been around a while, you know that this has been a challenge for a very long time. I think involving legislation, forcing companies to kind of make decisions here. And I think no legislation is perfect, and the problem is usually pretty bad if we have to legislate against it. But some of you may remember when we had to, we were asking candidates for their current salary, right? And now that's like unthinkable. Like, we're asking just for salary expectations. I'm excited for the direction that this is going. So I'm excited for the more pay equity here.
Fantastic. Love that. So thank you both. Audience, please join me in thanking our amazing speakers today and panelists. And also a huge thank you to our audience for making time to chat with us today and to hear our perspectives. Really appreciate you taking time out of your day or late evening or middle of the night in some cases, it looked like as well. So thank you all. Huge thank you. We'll be following up with folks that requested a demo shortly. If you want to see a demo of GEM, even if you didn't, we'll follow up with a recording of this session, some of the research that Janet shared, and wishing everyone a great rest of the year. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.